The deck tilts under my heels the moment Mark's hand connects with my shoulder. It isn't a tap. It isn't an accident. It is a shove, hard, deliberate, aimed straight at the railing behind me. For one horrible second I hang in the air. The warm evening light catches the dark surface of the water below. I see it rushing up toward me. Can't stop it. Then I hit. The ocean swallows me whole. My dress wraps tight around my legs. The cold slaps every nerve in my body at once. I claw my way back to the surface, coughing, salt burning the back of my throat. Above me, on the deck of the yacht, I hear laughter. Loud, careless, satisfied laughter. Someone shouts, "She's so dramatic, just let her swim." I know that voice. I helped build an entire company with that voice. I wipe the water from my eyes and look up. The yacht is already moving. Slowly, steadily, pulling away from me. Nobody throws a rope. Nobody leans over the railing. Nobody stops laughing. My own business partner shoved me overboard in front of investors, crew members, and guests holding full glasses of champagne. And the boat doesn't stop. As I tread water alone in the growing dark, one single thought rises above the panic pressing in on me. This was not a joke. This was the biggest mistake they ever made. 3 years before that night on the water, I was sitting cross-legged on a second-hand couch in a small shared apartment, eating cold noodles from a takeout box and writing code on a laptop that took 4 minutes to start up. That was where Vera began. Not in a fancy office. Not with a big check. Just me, Mark, and Dylan, sharing one bathroom and one massive dream. I was the one who built the product from scratch. Every line of code, every design choice, every system that made Vera work, that came from me. I put in 12, sometimes 15 hours a day. Mark handled relationships. He knew how to talk to people, how to make them feel like they were the most important person in the room. Dylan managed the money, or at least he was supposed to. We had one agreement between the three of us, and we shook hands on it like it meant everything. Equal partners, equal respect, equal share. So when we walked into our very first investor meeting, I was not prepared for what happened next. The investor asked who built the product. Before I could open my mouth, Mark put his hand on my shoulder and smiled. "This is Ava," he said. "Our technical support." I laughed it off that day. I told myself he just worded it badly. I should not have laughed. I should not have let it go. The cracks showed up slowly, like water finding its way through old walls. At first I thought I was imagining things. But then came the team dinner that changed everything. We were pitching a new feature to a small group of early clients, people who trusted us because of the product I had built. I was mid-sentence, explaining our roadmap, when Mark simply talked over me. Not by accident. He turned his body slightly away from me, raised his voice just enough, and hijacked the entire conversation. The clients shifted their attention to him. Dylan nodded along like everything was perfectly normal. Afterward I pulled Mark aside. Kept my voice steady. I told him what he had done was not okay. He looked at me the way someone looks at a child who doesn't understand something obvious. "You're too emotional for leadership, Ava," he said. "It comes across in meetings. We can't afford that right now." I stood there for a moment trying to find the right words. But here's what he never said out loud. The code that kept clients loyal, the strategy that was pulling us out of debt, the retention numbers that our investors praised every quarter. All of that came from my decisions. He knew it. Dylan knew it. They just needed me to forget it. That was the first time I understood that being right and being heard were two completely different things. By the end of our second year, my name had started to disappear. It happened quietly, which is what made it so effective. I would find the latest investor deck and scroll through it looking for my name. It would not be there. Not on the leadership page. Not in the founding story. Not in the acknowledgements. When I brought it up, Dylan gave me the same answer every time. "It's optics, Ava. Investors connect better with Mark's image. It's not personal." But it was personal. Every time I sat through a press interview where they introduced themselves as the founders of Vera, with no mention of me, it felt like something was being quietly stolen in broad daylight. The worst part was that I let it continue longer than I should have. I kept telling myself that the work mattered more than the credit. That if the company succeeded, we all succeeded. But I stopped believing that the moment I noticed Mark had started referring to Vera as his company, in casual conversations. Not our company. That was the week I started keeping records. I began printing emails, saving screenshots, writing down dates and exact words spoken in meetings. At the time I did not fully understand why I was doing it. Now I know. Somewhere deep inside me, I already knew this day was coming. And when it did, I was going to be ready. 6 months after the erasure started, they called it a restructure. I found out about it the same way I found out about most things by then, after it had already happened. I walked into the office on a Monday morning to find a new organizational chart printed and pinned to the board in the main meeting room. My name was still on it, but my title had changed. I was no longer CEO. I was now listed as head of product. No discussion. No vote. No warning. When I confronted Mark, he leaned back in his chair and folded his arms like someone who had already prepared for this conversation. "It's temporary," he said. "We're streamlining leadership so we can move faster. You'll understand once we start the next funding round." He smiled when he said it. Not a warm smile. The kind of smile that means someone has already won an argument they never let you know you were having. I went to Dylan next. He shrugged and said it made sense for the company's direction. For the company's direction. I had laid the foundation of that company with 3 years of 18-hour days. And now I was being quietly moved out of any role that carried real power. The restructure was not temporary. They had no intention of reversing it. I knew that the moment I saw Mark's smile. Some doors are closed politely so you won't notice them locking behind you. About 2 weeks after the restructure, a client called me directly. Her name was Pam, and she had been with us since the very early days. She trusted me. She had signed with Vera specifically because of conversations she and I had about where the product was going. "Ava," she said, her voice careful and confused. "Can you explain what's happening? Someone from the team told us you had stepped back from client relations. We're being handed to someone we've never spoken to." My stomach dropped. I had not stepped back from anything. I went straight to Mark. He told me it was a simple reallocation of resources, that I should be focusing on product and letting the client team handle accounts. But Pam's account had been mine. I had built that relationship from scratch. Reassigning it without telling me, or Pam, was not a reallocation. It was a removal. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and went through every active account I had been managing. 8 of them had been quietly reassigned. 8 clients who trusted me were now being handed to people they had never met, with a cover story that I had chosen to step back. I copied every relevant email, every contract, every decision log onto an encrypted hard drive. I placed the drive in a fireproof box in my bedroom closet. I was not being paranoid. I was being prepared. There is a difference, and that difference would matter enormously later. The invitation came on a Thursday. Team bonding retreat, the message said. Luxury yachts Saturday afternoon. Investors included. Dress smart. Came from Dylan's email address, which was unusual. Mark usually handled anything that involved investors. I read the message 3 times. Something about it sat wrong with me. I could not name it exactly. It was more of a feeling, the kind that settles in your chest when something looks fine on the surface but doesn't feel fine underneath. I almost sent a reply saying I could not make it. I had a reason ready. Product deadline I could point to. But then I remembered what I had learned over the past several months. Every time I was absent from something involving investors, the story got worse for me. My name disappeared a little more. The version of events shifted slightly further in their favor. If something was going to happen on that boat, I needed to be there. Not to cause a scene. Not to start a fight. I needed to be a witness to whatever they were planning. I confirmed my attendance and then spent Friday reviewing every document I had saved. I also checked that my phone had enough storage and that the audio recording function was working properly. I was not sure exactly what I was preparing for, but I had stopped being caught off guard. When I stepped onto that boat on Saturday, I was ready. The yacht was exactly what I expected. White, expensive, and designed to make people feel like they had already made it. Investors moved around the deck with drinks in hand, laughing at things that probably were not funny but sounded better with a view of the open water behind them. I arrived and smiled at the people I recognized. I kept my body language open and relaxed. I gave nothing away. Then the toast started. Mark tapped his glass and waited until everyone went quiet. He was good at that, commanding a room without raising his voice. He thanked everyone for their belief in Vera. He talked about growth, vision, and the future they were all going to build together. People nodded. Glasses went up. And then he paused, just long enough to be deliberate, and added 7 more words. And to letting go of what's holding us back. He did not look at me when he said it. He did not have to. Few people glanced in my direction. I saw it, the quick, uncomfortable flicker of their eyes. They already knew. This moment had been planned and discussed before I ever stepped foot on the boat. I kept my face completely still. I did not react. I reached into my jacket pocket and pressed the record button on my phone. Whatever was about to happen next, I was going to have every word of it on record. They started with small jabs. Comments about a product decision I had made in the first year. One that had worked but that they were now reframing as a near disaster. I corrected the record calmly. Then they moved to a pricing strategy one had pushed for that had doubled our renewal rate. Dylan called it lucky. Mark called it obvious in hindsight. A few investors chuckled, unsure whether to laugh or not. I stayed calm. Kept my voice level. I answered each point with facts, not emotion. But that was not what they wanted. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to raise my voice, to look unstable, to give everyone on that deck a reason to agree with the story they had already been telling behind my back. When I did not give it to them, Mark stepped closer. I thought he was going to say something else. Instead, he reached out and shoved me, 2 hands full force straight into my shoulder. I went over the railing before I even fully understood what had happened. A splash. Cold. The shock of hitting water in a dress and heels. I heard the laughter before I even surfaced. My phone was still in my jacket pocket. It was still recording. Everything they had said, everything they had done, every laugh and every word. All of it captured in the dark water with me. A man fishing near the marina saw me struggling in the water. He pulled his small boat alongside, reached out his hand, and hauled me over the edge without asking a single question. His name was Otto. He draped a dry jacket over my shoulders. It smelled like motor oil and salt, and handed me a bottle of water while I sat on the floor of his boat, shaking. I did not cry. The shock was still too fresh for tears. I sat there and breathed and looked at the lights of the marina while the anger settled into something colder and much more useful. When I finally reached into my soaked jacket pocket, the phone was still on. The screen had a crack across one corner and the casing was fogged with water damage, but the audio file had saved. I pressed play with a trembling finger. The recording had caught everything. Mark's toast. Dylan's comments. Laughter. The thud of the shove. My own gasp. A splash. And then, most clearly of all, a voice on the deck saying, "That's the cleanest exit we've ever staged." I listened to it twice. Then I locked the file and backed it up to 2 separate cloud accounts before I did anything else. By the time Otto's boat reached the dock, the shock had left my body completely. What replaced it was not grief. It was precision. I was not going to react to what they had done. I was going to respond to it, carefully, completely, and on my own timeline. The email came the next morning at 8:42. I was already awake, sitting at my kitchen table with coffee, still in the same clothes from the night before. The subject line read, "Important update regarding your position at Vera." I opened it and read it slowly, twice. After careful consideration and following a pattern of concerning behavioral incidents, the leadership team has made the decision to terminate your position at Vera, effective immediately. We wish you well in your next steps. Behavioral concerns. They shoved me off a boat in front of investors and crew members, and then had the nerve to use the words behavioral concerns to describe me. I placed my phone face down on the kitchen table and sat with that for a full minute. Then I picked it up again and did something they were not expecting. I did not reply to the email. I did not call Mark. I did not text Dylan. I did not post anything online. I did not tell a single person what had happened. Not yet. Instead, I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I had saved months earlier. A lawyer named Neil who specialized in business disputes and founder rights. I had saved his number the week of the restructure, the way someone keeps an umbrella in the car, just in case. I called him at 9 in the morning and said 4 words. I need your help. Neil's office was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like coffee and old paper. He sat across from me and read through every document I had brought. The original partnership agreement, the equity paperwork, the emails I had printed, the restructure notice, the termination letter, and the audio file from the boat. He did not speak for a long time. When he finally looked up, his expression was careful and focused. They made several serious mistakes, he said. He walked me through each one slowly. The restructure had been done without a proper board vote, which violated our governance agreement. Removing me from client accounts without notice had breached specific terms in my contract. And the termination, filed as behavioral misconduct without any documented process or warning, could expose them to a wrongful dismissal claim. Could sue. I had more than enough to win. But when Neil asked what outcome I wanted, I thought about it longer than he expected. I don't want a settlement, I said. I don't want money. I want my company back. He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. Then we don't file yet, he said. We protect your position. We secure your evidence. And we wait for the right moment. That was when I understood this was not going to be a fight. It was going to be a strategy. And I had always been better at strategy than either of them. 3 weeks after the termination, I received a message I did not expect. It was from Claire Weston, one of the investors who had been on the boat that night. I had spoken to her maybe twice before. Brief, polite exchanges at events. She was not flashy. She did not talk much. But she always listened in a way that made you feel like she was hearing things other people missed. Her message was short. Like to meet. Coffee. No agenda. Just a conversation. I almost did not go. But Neil encouraged me to hear her out. We met at a small cafe away from the areas where Vera people usually gathered. Claire arrived before me and was already seated with 2 coffees on the table. She waited until I sat down before she said anything. Then she looked at me directly and said, I want you to know something. I have been watching how Vera actually operates for the past year. Not what Mark presents in meetings. The real numbers. The client retention behind the scenes. The product decisions that kept this company alive. And I know where all of it comes from. Pause. Comes from you. Nobody from the investor side had ever said that to me. Not once in 3 years. I felt something shift inside me. Not exactly gratitude. More like recognition. Someone had finally seen what I had been quietly building all along. And she had been paying close attention. Claire did not just believe in me, she had proof. She pulled out a thin folder and placed it on the table between us. Inside were internal performance reports covering the 6 months since I had been pushed out of my leadership role. The numbers were not good. Client churn had risen by 22%. 2 of Vera's biggest accounts had opened conversations with competitors. The product roadmap had stalled completely. 3 senior engineers had resigned in the past 2 months, giving vague reasons in their exit interviews that all pointed to the same thing: leadership problems. Mark had been making product decisions without consulting the people responsible for building them. Dylan had approved a new sales strategy that clashed directly with what the product could actually deliver. They were over-promising to investors and underperforming on the ground, and the gap between those 2 things was getting wider every week. Claire watched me read through the reports carefully. They sidelined the one person who knew how to run this company, she said. And the company is paying for it now. I closed the folder and set it back on the table. A strange calm settled over me. I had spent several nights lying awake wondering if they could manage without me. Worrying that my absence would go completely unnoticed. Looking at those numbers, I understood something clearly for the first time. They never could. Not for long. Not ever. Claire leaned forward and folded her hands on the table. I want to propose something, she said, and I want you to hear all of it before you decide. She explained that she was not the only investor concerned about Vera's direction. 2 others had already raised quiet questions about the company's performance since the leadership changes. If the decline continued, there was a path, legal, clean and structured, to call for a board intervention. A formal review of the current leadership team based on breach of fiduciary duty and documented governance violations. My job, if I agreed to the plan, was simple. Stay quiet for a little longer. Let them keep making mistakes. Keep building the legal record with Neil. We are not going after them personally, Claire said carefully. We are going after the consequences of their own choices. The numbers, the violations, the behavior on that boat. All of it on the record, handled through the proper process. What happens after the board reviews? Yes. That depends on the vote, she said. But if things continue the way they are going, and I believe they will, the board will need to make a change in leadership. And I will be proposing a name. She looked at me steadily across the table. I did not need her to say whose name it was. Already knew. I said yes before she finished her sentence. The plan was in motion. Now I just had to be patient enough to let it work. The hardest part of the entire plan was the silence. Not the late nights reviewing documents with Neil. Not the anxiety of watching from a distance while Vera stumbled forward without me. The hardest part was logging onto my laptop every morning and seeing Mark and Dylan post about the company's bright future, while comments poured in praising their vision and leadership. People who did not know the full story were genuinely impressed by them. A few articles mentioned a leadership shift that had brought fresh energy to the company. One piece described Vera as returning to its founding vision. None of those writers knew that the founding vision had been mine from the very beginning. I wanted to correct the record so many times. I drafted messages I never sent. I opened comment sections and then closed them before typing a single word. I reminded myself every single time that reacting publicly would only help them. It would give them exactly what they had always wanted, a version of me that looked unstable, emotional, and easy to dismiss. I was none of those things. I was patient. Neil reviewed the legal file every week. Claire checked in quietly every few days. The evidence kept growing. The company's numbers kept declining. Weeks turned into a full month. A month edged toward 2. I let them talk. I let them celebrate. And I kept building the case that would eventually bring everything they had constructed crashing down. The audio did not come from me. I want to be completely clear about that. I had made a decision early on to hold the recording as part of the legal process and nothing else. What I did not know was that someone else on that boat had a conscience. I got the call from Neil on a Tuesday afternoon. He told me to search a specific platform online. I typed in the keywords and found the clip within seconds. A short audio recording, posted by an anonymous account, just over 2 minutes long. I pressed play and heard my own voice, sharp and steady, presenting facts while Mark talked over me. I heard the laughter. I heard the shove. I heard the splash. And then I heard the line that stopped everyone who listened cold. That's the cleanest exit we've ever staged. By the time I set my phone down, the clip already had thousands of shares. People were furious. Comments were pouring in faster than anyone could moderate them. Journalists were tagging the company account and demanding statements. Within 24 hours, Vera's pages were flooded with responses. 2 brands that had been in early partnership discussions quietly pulled back. A major technology outlet ran the story under the headline, "Co-founder shoved overboard," literally. Public opinion had shifted completely overnight. The ground under Mark and Dylan was moving fast. And they had absolutely no idea how fast it was moving. Mark called me at 7 in the morning. I was already awake, sitting at my kitchen table with coffee, watching the news coverage update in real time. I looked at his name on my screen for 3 full rings. Then I declined the call. He called again. I declined again. An hour later, Dylan sent an email. The subject line read, "We should talk." The body was 2 paragraphs of careful, legal-sounding language about the boat incident being mischaracterized and the audio being taken out of context. There was no apology anywhere in it. No acknowledgement that any of what the recording captured had actually happened. At the bottom of the email, almost as an afterthought, Dylan had written, "We think there's a path forward that works for everyone. We can make this right." 3 months ago, making it right might have meant something to me. 3 months ago, I would have answered the call. I would have sat across from them and tried, one more time, to find a version of this story where we all walked away whole. But I had seen the numbers Claire showed me. I had read every email I had saved over 2 years of careful documentation. I had listened to that audio recording enough times to know every word by heart. I did not reply to Dylan's email. There was no path forward with them. There was only a path forward for the company. And that was a completely different conversation from anyone they could offer me. The board meeting was called 4 days after the audio went viral. Claire had been working quietly behind the scenes, reaching out to the other investors one by one, presenting the performance numbers and the documented legal concerns. By the time the formal notice went out, she already had enough support to make the meeting matter. I was not in the room. I sat in Neil's office while he attended as my legal representative. But Claire had arranged a way for me to follow along through a small audio device. I listened from Neil's office, barely breathing. Mark opened the meeting the way he always opened everything, with confidence and a polished version of events. He called the audio manipulated. He blamed the company's declining performance on market conditions. He described my removal as a leadership decision made in the best interest of Vera's future. Then Claire spoke. She presented the performance reports. She presented the documented governance violations. She presented 3 written statements from investors who had been quietly concerned for months, and a timeline of every major decision made since my removal, cross-referenced with the company's declining numbers. Then Neil submitted the full legal record of every rule they had broken. The energy in that room changed. When Mark tried to respond, one board member held up a hand and said simply, "We've heard enough." 4 words. They landed like a door closing on everything Mark had built his version of reality on. What happened next was the thing Mark and Dylan had never anticipated. Before the board could formally discuss next steps, Neil asked permission to submit one final document. It was my original co-founder contract, the one all 3 of us had signed at the same kitchen table where we used to eat cold noodles and talk about building something that would last. Most of the contract was standard language. But buried in Section 11 was a clause that Mark and Dylan had clearly never fully read. It stated that in the event of a co-founder's removal resulting from misconduct by other members of the leadership team, and where that misconduct could be proven through proper documentation, the removed co-founder retained the right to be reinstated to their original position. Or, if reinstatement was approved by a majority board vote, to assume full operational leadership of the company. They had violated the governance rules in writing. The audio proved deliberate misconduct on the boat. The legal record was clean and complete. Neil laid it all out point by point without raising his voice once. The board read the clause. Then they read it again. The room went quiet for almost a full minute. Then the board chairperson looked up and said, "This changes the scope of our discussion significantly." I heard it through the device in Neil's office and felt the first real smile cross my face in months. They had signed that contract. They had just forgotten what was in it. Claire presented the proposal to the board clearly and without drama. She did not use emotional language. She did not talk about what had been done to me personally or ask anyone to feel sorry for what I had been through. She spoke entirely about the company, about stability, about client confidence, about the technical foundation that needed a steady and capable hand to rebuild lost momentum. She put forward one name. Not as a return favor. Not as punishment for Mark and Dylan. As the most logical and well-supported solution to a company in decline that had been built entirely by someone they had pushed out illegally. She backed it with data. Client feedback collected over 6 months showed that many of Vera's earliest and most loyal accounts specifically named me when asked what they valued about the company. The engineering team had submitted a quiet internal petition, 11 signatures, expressing concern about the product direction and asking for more stable leadership at the top. 3 of the 4 remaining investors indicated they would support a leadership change if the board determined it was necessary for the company's survival. Claire finished speaking and sat down. Neil nodded at me quietly. I exhaled slowly. I had done everything I could. I had built the case, protected my legal position, stayed silent when everything in me wanted to speak, and trusted the process completely. Now the only thing left to do was wait for the vote. Neil sent me a text with 2 words. It's time. I drove to the building and waited in the lobby. I had not been inside since the morning after the vote. The receptionist at the front desk recognized me immediately. She smiled in a way that told me the news had already moved through the building faster than any official update could. I rode the elevator to the 4th floor and stood outside the conference room door. Inside, the board was finalizing the vote. Neil was already in there. Claire had texted me minutes before to say the mood was clear. But nothing is truly certain until it is done. The door opened. Neil stepped out first. His expression was controlled and careful, the kind that means he is holding something much bigger underneath. He handed me a single printed sheet. The official vote record. I read down the list slowly. Each board member. Each vote. 4 in favor. 1 abstention. 0 against. Majority. I looked up and met Neil's eyes. He allowed himself a small, quiet smile. Congratulations, he said. You're the new CEO of Vera. Through the open door behind him, I heard voices shifting and chairs scraping back. Someone inside said Mark's name in a tone that told me everything. His version of the story was finished. I folded the vote record carefully and placed it in my bag. I did not rush. I did not celebrate out loud. I just took one steady breath and stepped forward. I walked back into the building I had helped design from the ground up. Same floors. Same windows. Same logo on the wall that I had argued for during a 3-hour debate nobody else wanted to have. But everything felt completely different now. People in the open office area looked up as I passed. Some looked genuinely surprised. A few looked relieved. Visibly, unmistakably relieved, as if something that had been off balance for months had finally been set right. I walked to the main conference room. Mark was there, standing beside the long table, a box of personal items at his feet. He looked older than I remembered. Smaller somehow, in a way that had nothing to do with his size. When he saw me walk through the door, something moved across his face. Not exactly anger, not quite shame. Something caught in between the two. You planned all of this, he said. His voice was low and flat. I stopped in the doorway and looked at him calmly for a moment before answering. No, Mark, I said. You planned all of this. The erasure. The restructure. The boat. Every part of it. I just made sure there was a record. He did not say anything else. Dylan had already cleared out his things and left the building before I arrived. I did not go looking for him. I had more important things to do. I walked to my old desk, set my bag down beside the chair and got to work. The first week back was about people, not numbers. I reinstated 2 product managers who had been quietly pushed out after raising concerns about the direction of the company. I met one-on-one with every member of the engineering team and asked the same 2 questions each time. What is broken and what do you need? The answers were honest and, in some cases, difficult to sit with. Decisions had been made without consulting the people responsible for carrying them out. Timelines had been promised to clients that the team knew from the beginning were impossible to meet. Morale had dropped in ways that did not show up in any report but were obvious in how people moved through the hallways and how little they spoke in meetings. I called Pam. The client Mark had reassigned without telling me or her. She answered on the second ring. When I explained that I was back and wanted to personally re-engage her account, she went quiet for a moment. Then she said, Ava, I have been waiting for this call for 6 months. Within 30 days, 4 of the 8 accounts that had been quietly drifting toward competitors came back. The engineering team submitted a product update for the first time in 3 months. The numbers were not perfect yet. Recovery never happens overnight. But the company had stopped bleeding. Slowly and steadily, it had started to breathe again. And that was enough to begin. Months later, we held a company retreat. Not a luxury yacht. A rented house by a lake. Simple and comfortable, with long tables, good food, and people who were genuinely glad to be in the same room together. At one point during the evening, one of the engineers made a joke. He pointed toward the water at the edge of the property and said, "Careful near the edge, boss." People laughed. The easy, open kind of laughter that only happens when a room truly feels safe. I smiled and took a deliberate step back from the shore, because I had learned something real through all of it. Power that needs to shove someone out of the way to survive is not power at all. It is just fear wearing a nice suit. The people who pushed me out believed that removing me would make them stronger. Instead, it exposed exactly how much they had always needed what I built. They thought they were throwing away a problem. They had actually thrown away the only thing holding everything together. And the wave they created by doing that, the legal violations, the declining numbers, the audio recording, the board vote, that wave did not destroy me. Carried me back. I did not inherit this company. I built it with my own hands and my own mind, starting from a second-hand couch in a shared apartment with cold noodles and a slow laptop. I was pushed out of it. I came back to it. Not through anger, not through revenge, but through patience, proof, and an unshakable belief in my own worth. Some waves are designed to drown you. You just have to know how to let them carry you home.